have a guest this morning. Jonathan Petersen is a town council member from the town of Munster. Good morning.
Good morning, Tom. How are you?
Good, and welcome to WJOB. Have you been on the air before?
I have, but I was the last time I was on was at the other location there, just south of here.
Yes.
This has got a more historic vibe to it.
It does.
So I'm feeling it, and I love the T-shirt up there. It says Northwest Indiana Bears. I am all for that. So
about where you're sitting, although in the opposite direction, is where Larry Petersen used to sit and do the news.
Is that right?
And this is an historic building and a great place to be. And I know it's the Straka Van Til Studios, but this morning it's the Jed Didalo Studios because the air conditioning's not working. So we're blaming it. We're blaming it on Jed. So shout out to the boss. So you've been a town councilman for how long now?
This is my first term. But Tom, before we get started, I want to do something. I was doing my homework last night, and I got on your LinkedIn profile, and I discovered that you are a longtime member of the Hammond Housing Authority. In fact,
yes.
you were just recently the chairman.
I was chairman for about a dozen years, yes.
Okay, so I want to give you something. Part of my practice is real estate law. And a number of years ago, and there's a great story behind this if you'd like to hear it, I dedicated myself to the practice of eviction law and helping landlords, particularly mom and pop landlords, when they run into tenants that aren't paying or aren't doing what they want. And in order to do that, I wrote a book. It's a legal treatise called Indiana Eviction Law. And I want to gift a copy of it to you.
Very good. And I enjoy reading books. I enjoy reading books like this because, as you know, I asked you off the air if you knew my brother David. You said you did. My brother David, my son Tom are attorneys locally. And, of course, my brother Mark is an attorney out east. And my brother Michael, who passed away some years ago, is also an attorney. So lots of attorneys in the Dabertin family. And I like to read these kinds of things so that I can stay in the conversation on the 4th of July. So there you go. So thank you very much.
You bet.
So your first term council member
correct.
In Munster.
That's correct.
And there are 5 members to the town council?
That's right. We have 5 members. Munster is broken down by a ward map. We all run at large. But there's 5 wards, and each the councilman must reside in their respective ward in order to be eligible to run.
Okay, and that's interesting because the number of council members in a town usually varies from 5 to 7. And unlike a city, they usually don't have an at-large member. The city, in comparison, the city of Hammond has 9 members, and they have 3 members that run at large. So town councils usually are tied to their ward or their district.
Right. Yeah, that's a little bit different. I think that there's a little bit of flexibility in terms of how towns are permitted to organize themselves by state law. Munster has always had 5 members located in wards who run at large.
And I mentioned also Tom DiGiulio, who was the town manager for many, many years in Munster. And I started about the same time. Tom became the Munster town manager. I became the first town manager of Cedar Lake. And one of the things that we started was a group called the Indiana Municipal Management Association. And again, was very proud of that fact that we tried to pull other town managers together. Tom Keilman followed us in Maryville not too long after and passed away a few years ago as a friend of mine. And so understand the structure and goings on of towns. Also been a consultant to a number of towns in Northwest Indiana for a number of years, as well as cities. So Munster has always been a community that others, I think, look at to emulate. Very well run.
I appreciate that.
Very content, I think, with overall operations. It's unique because it's been run by the same party, I think, for probably going on close to 30 years. It's always been all Republican.
There have been times where we've had split councils. I'd say we have a split council right now to some degree. But yeah, it has been, Republicans have been in leadership positions. I think that's a fair statement for the last 30 years.
And that's a valid point, what you said. You know, there are times where you've had a split council. So I guess I bring that up because it's not always about the party, all right? Hammond has had Republican members of their city council, for example, over the years, and Highland and others. And when it comes to local politics, I'm not sure that party affiliation always is as important as maybe it is in Congress, because at the local level, you can be a Republican and I can be a Republican and we can vote differently, and so that occurs in Munster.
I think that's fair. And in fact, to illustrate your point, I think you are seeing in Munster right now a generational transition in the Republican Party. Munster historically was a very red community, and in order to get elected in Munster, you just needed to have that R behind your name. And what that created was an environment where people got the tap on the shoulder. And it wasn't so much that they were espousing any sort of philosophical approach to government. It was more, that person's a Republican, I'm voting for them. And to some extent, and I've heard people say this, and I think it's a valid criticism, people that come out of that environment are sometimes known for sticking their finger up in the air and waiting to see which way the wind blows. And when I said that there's a generational change that's occurring, I believe what's happening is that Munster is changing from a red community to a more purple community, and as a result, people are not so accepting of voting for somebody just because they're Republican. In fact, I think Munster is evolving into a scenario very similar to Griffith. I don't think anyone will argue that Griffith is anything but a blue community. But the Republicans under Rick Rifa and Tom Wichlinski have been running that community for, 20 years?
Yes.
And the way that they do it represents a fundamental change to the political dynamic. Those guys go out and they articulate and they campaign on, this is what we're going to do for you. Think about that Calumet Township situation. They came out and said, this doesn't work for Griffith. Cal Township is taking all these resources out of our community. We're not getting much back in return. We think we should be allowed to pull out. The town of Griffith agreed with them. They campaigned on that, and they were able to change that town council. I believe Griffith is 100% Republican right now, and I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing the new breed of Republicans in Munster recognize we have to actually tell people what we're going to do for them, and then we've got to follow through on it.
So again, I agree with you from the perception that it has less to do about party than it has to do about accomplishment. But let's just get right to it. So
it's 7:15.
you basically, you have supporters and critics. You have supporters who say that you are a change agent, okay? And you have critics that say you're controversial. So what is it?
I think I can be both. I think I'm a change agent. I think I represent the new approach to government, a form of approach that is something I think the community wants. I think the community likes having elected officials who you can go to and say, this is what I think. Or, hang on, I haven't finished my homework. Let me complete my research on this, and I promise you I'll tell you my position.
Okay, but that's a change agent. You said you can be both. Because I'm not sure that people want someone who they consider controversial.
Well, okay, I'm taking how you use the word controversial as a pejorative connotation. And I don't think that has to be pejorative. I don't think there has to be a negative attached to that. When you are in the middle of changing an environment, when you're changing a political dynamic, it's controversial. There are a lot of people in Munster that say, look, this has worked for the last 30 years. All you had to do was say you're a Republican, and that was enough to get us elected. And my approach, and a lot of people who support me, their approach is that's not good enough anymore. You've got to actually be prepared to offer solutions to people and a strategy for governance. And that's where I think the controversy comes, because some of these people that are so entwined in the old way of doing things, they are reluctant, and I think they're afraid of what this change represents. And I think that's the thrust of any controversy that might be out there.
And I also think that when it comes to town councils, a lot of controversy comes up when it has to do with economic development. Okay, because people feel safe in their own yards, their own backyards. They know what to expect when they hear about new development. And I think some of the controversy comes down to some of the development that's been proposed for Munster.
Yeah, Tom, you hit it right in the head, nailhead. Munster, in terms of a municipal development life cycle, is more towards the end of the life cycle. We only have a few larger parcels left to develop, and I'll highlight a couple of them. The Centennial Village project on the south side of town. Matt Kimmel is developing that, and he has made some really fantastic proposals. One of the things that he's put out there, and I hope he can bring this through, is he's proposed to bring in a Sprouts grocery store, which is one of these newer boutique-y type stores, and I think people would really love it. The other undeveloped parcel is the old Lansing Country Club. Now, for a lot of people, when you say Lansing Country Club, they think, it's just in Lansing. No, there was 60 acres in Munster. It was right behind the old Simmons factory there on Calumet Avenue. And that is a huge development possibility. And we have a developer that's come in. I understand he's originally from Lansing. And he came to us from Lansing to Boston and back to the area. And the company that owns it is Saxon Partners, and their development wing is called Spin LLC. And when he first arrived in Munster, early 2020s, the proposal was a very attractive office and medical business suite environment. And I liked it. I thought that there were great complementary effects to a proposal like that. Here are the things I liked about it. Commercial development, in terms of our Indiana state property tax structure, commercial development pays 3% of income tax, and it imposes the lowest burdens on municipal services. Contrast that with owner-occupied residential, that pays 1% of the assessed value in property taxes, and that has anywhere from a median to a heavy service burden load. So commercial, you're getting a net positive return on the investment in terms of the property tax return. Okay, so the developer noodled around with that, and sometime last year, he came to the council and said, look, I've been watching the Purdue Technology Center down in Crown Point. It's an incubator site.
Right.
They're bringing in college kids, they're bringing in professionals. I like. That was my thinking. How about I change this zoning and turn this into a technology park and focus on bringing in incubator companies and make Munster a center of technology development? And I got a little starstruck by it, candidly. I thought this was phenomenal. This is great. Now, what was buried in that zoning change was some language under an special exception use, which it wasn't, I don't believe it was explicitly stated, but it could be inferred, data center. And about 2 months ago, this whole thing about data centers started emerging. And I started doing my homework on it. And I researched it, and in fact, I was retained by a client, a longtime client, who lives down in Lowell, where a data center project was coming in for them. and I was retained to try and help slow that project down. And I did a lot of homework.
Well, it
on
wasn't slow the project down. I actually read the letter that you posted online. You basically represented a client in their opposition.
Yeah, they didn't want it. And
Right.
now, I come at this, my research has led me to this, has led me to my opposition to data centers from a perspective that I think runs parallel to what you hear a lot of people say. When you talk to folks that are opposed to data centers, you hear a lot about the environmental impacts of a data center. You hear a lot about the health impacts of a data center, and all these things are valid concerns.
But you also hear a lot of people who have the idea that if we don't build data centers in the United States, that we won't lose jobs, and that's a misnomer because data centers are going to be built somewhere, probably in China, and we're in a bit of an AI race with China. And so data centers, I'm not a huge fan of them, but data centers are necessary. Where they get built, I agree, is a debate that the public and residents have to have, but I won't say that data centers are any worse than any other development. I mean, they have some environmental concerns, and they use a lot of power and they use a lot of water, but there are a lot of operations that do just that. They all use power. I mean, an Amazon facility uses power. The incubators you're talking about uses power. So those issues aside, the question is whether it's appropriate for the location.
Yeah, and in fact, to illustrate your point, I like bacon and eggs in the morning. That doesn't mean I want a pig farm behind my house.
Okay.
Right?
Safe.
And here's another thing. And for my friends, I tell them it's a shaving moment. I tend to have a very reflective time when I'm shaving. So I tell people, hey, I came up with this idea with shaving. And my friends know if I say it was a shaving moment, they know this is something I've been thinking about. So, shaving moment. I have been observing the data center build-out process, and I'm going to tell you, you and I have been around, and we've seen these tech cycles. And what you tend to see with a technology cycle is there's a huge amount of interest, there's a huge amount of money, and there's a huge investment in this technology. And it starts like a tidal wave. And then all of a sudden, the build out is underway, and then the consolidation happens. And when the consolidation happens, a lot of these built out environments, they go away. And I am developing a concern that this data center rush is very similar to one of these tech bubbles. And why I settled on this is something that we had to wrestle with this past spring. We were repainting the water towers in Munster, and the public works guys put out an email to the council and said, hey, we've got a couple of these cell phone antennas up here, and we can't find any companies that are responsible for removing them. What do you want to do? Well, in order to repaint the water towers, we had to pay for the removal. And I started thinking, okay, so I know when they put those cell phone towers in, there was some company that gave assurances, hey, when we're done using the cell phone tower, we're going to take it down. And when you start scratching the paperwork from the data center developers, one of the things that comes out, they're always saying, hey, this is a pot of gold. That's the big sales pitch.
Sure, it is, because they're enticing communities with large amounts of donations and additional revenues that go beyond the assessed value.
Yeah, exactly. Now, scratch beneath the surface, Tom, and one of the things that's buried in the paperwork is a representation from the developer. Oh, we're also going to include a decommissioning agreement with this proposal. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, what it means is, and my good friend Tony Ferraro, I'm sure you know Tony, he works for the governor. Tony said, you know what, Jonathan, this is what it means. They need 1 million square feet today. The technological wheel's going to spin. Tomorrow they're going to need a space the size of a garage. And they're telling you that when they don't need that 1 million square feet that they have built out, they're going to take it away. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, okay, that's what they're telling us now. But just like that cell phone antenna, once the use goes away, all of a sudden, the tower gets transferred to another company, and then another company, and then there's a paper company that comes up. And by the time you seek to invoke that decommissioning provision, there's nobody there with any money in their pockets to pay for it. And that's one of the concerns I expressed in that letter that you read. It's the stranded site concern.
And I saw that. And again, I, in the interest of time, I want to move on. And again, I have mixed feelings about data centers. I think that they are necessary for us to keep our technological edge. At the same time, you know, the old NIMBY, not in my backyard. There have been some criticisms about you. There are some claims that you led directly to a large turnover with the town of Munster, that the town manager, the police chief, the public works director, and others have left because of you. How do you say? What do you say about that?
I don't know about that, but to echo your point earlier in the conversation, I believe our staff is the best in Lake County. And I spoke with the police chief a couple of days ago, and he said, yeah, Jonathan, I don't like some of the tension on the council, but I've been serving for 38 years. My wife has told me it's time. I got to respect that, and that's what he told me. But I want to go back to...
Well, wait a minute, because I want to stay on this point for a minute, because you're right. Munster has always been viewed as a very top-heavy community when it comes to talent for leadership, okay? They have.
I agree.
You know, again, I'll go back as a throwback to my friendship with Tom DiGiulio. And Munster always was able to hire the best and the brightest. And I remember in one case where Tom was trying to hire somebody away from me, and I'm like, you know, over your dead body, Tom. and you know, and he was successful, and I won't say who, but you have a perspective from residents that they're losing this top talent. And it's one thing, by the way, I've been a consultant for years, and I go in and I tell my clients all the time, change is important, change is necessary. You have to be a change agent. But you also want to make sure that you're not the cause of a mass exodus.
Well,
and so the blame is out there that they're blaming you because, as you said, you have some differences on the town council. So I want you to either explain or either defend or discount the fact that you're the cause.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I want to speak directly to one of the departures. That was our public works director, Bob Valoy. I got to know Bob very well during the time he was with Munster. Bob, I found him to be a phenomenal administrator. He ran that department like a well-oiled Swiss watch. Just to illustrate, last fall, when we had that early season snowstorm, Munster was the one community in Lake County that was dug out the day the storm happened. We were there, and I go to court every week in Gary. Gary was digging out a week later. Bob is phenomenal. So here's what happened with Bob, and I had a number of conversations with him about this. Being one of the top public works directors in Northwest Indiana, the city of Valparaiso was looking for somebody, and they came a-sniffing around, and they approached Bob. He told me he didn't have his resume out on the street, but they approached him, and they made him a substantially attractive offer. And here's where, in my opinion, we dropped the ball. When you've got top quality staff, you got to compensate them. And Bob got an offer, a competitive offer, and we never bothered to respond to that. We let him go.
So I just want to clarify. You're saying in the case of the public works director, basically, you didn't compete as a town, not you personally, but the town didn't compete in meeting the offer that Valparaiso threw out there. And a shout out to John Costas, who I've consulted to. I will point that out. But John is very good at finding top talent, looking at everybody else, just like Tom DiGiulio used to do to me back in the day.
Yeah,
so,
and one further illustration of what a quality individual Bob Valoy is. I learned this after he left. There was a employee from his department who had fallen seriously ill and was out on family and medical leave. And his sick time had run out, so he wasn't eligible for further town compensation. But he needed to continue to pay his biweekly employee health insurance premiums.
Right.
Bob covered that out of his own pocket. Wow.
That's pretty amazing.
What a phenomenal guy. This is the quality of people that we have. And I'm going to tell you, when you've got top quality people, I know this, I've observed this as a town councilor. I've also experienced this as an attorney with my own practice. Every once in a while, you got to step up and write the check. And that was the situation with Bob. There's
another issue, and you just brought it up by accident, but you refer to yourself as town councilor. And there are people, and I saw this last night on Facebook, there are people who say, you call yourself town councilor, you're not the town attorney, you're a town council member, you're a town councilman. And that when you use the term councilor, because I think you have, the comment was you had a night out, kind of like the way the mayor of Hammond does his night out. You had councilor night out, and they're saying that the use of the term councilor is you're inferring that you're the town legal expert. You want to address that?
Okay, well, again, these are homophones, if I got that word right. You got two words that sound the same, but they're spelled differently. Counselor, in terms of the elected official, is C-O-U-N-C-I-L-O-R. Counselor, in the context of an attorney, is spelled C-O-U-N-S-E-L-O-R.
Right.
So when I did my town councilor night out, I believe we spelled it correctly. But you know what?
You did. I will tell you right now, you did, but there was the inference, okay? There was also the inference that you are an attorney, and again, I have great respect for attorneys, although not at family gatherings. They just want some siblings who are listening to know that. Not at family gatherings. But people say, well, you will send letters, and you send them as Jonathan Petersen, attorney at law. What I saw was you send letters, but they're not necessarily saying attorney at law.
No,
you don't state when you are stating your position on a town of Munster. You're not stating that you're as an attorney.
That's correct, and it's necessary. I am not the town attorney. In fact, that came up last night. We had an agenda review, and we were having a conversation, and I had to remind my colleagues and the staff, I'm not the town attorney. I had introduced last night a civility and decorum resolution. Some of the more recent council meetings have gotten a little spicy. There's been some insults directed at people. Often they land on me. And I thought, you know what? Just like we have in the House of Representatives, just like we have in the State House, they have rules of decorum. And part of those rules are you can't go out and start accusing people of lying, of acting in bad faith. You can't use profanity. I didn't think it was controversial, but that conversation last night got heated. And at one point, I had to step back and say, look, guys, I'm a town councilor, town councilman, an elected official. I'm not the town attorney. My colleagues last night indicated they didn't want to proceed with that resolution. One of the comments was they want to have the town attorney review this. That's fine. I hope, though, that we'll come back and do that. But getting back to one of your comments earlier about controversy, I think this perfectly illustrates this concept of controversy that has emerged. I put on recently a town councilor's night out. And you know what? When you said it was like what the mayor does, yeah, I have great respect for Tom McDermott. Right after I got elected in 23, Tom and his team were having a mayor's night out in Hessville. I went and observed it. I thought it was phenomenal what they do. And I thought, this is part of that change that's occurring in Munster. People want proactive, engaged elected officials. So I announced a counselor's night out. I expressed to the other councilmen, you're welcome to join me. And it turned out to be controversial. How dare you do that?
All right, let's take a quick break. We're going to come right back because I want to talk about the decorum issue a little bit more. We've got Jonathan Petersen, the town councilman from Munster, on with us live, and we'll be right back after these commercial announcements. We are back. We've got Jonathan Petersen. He's going to be here until 8 o'clock, and I know there's some people waiting on the phones. We're going to get to those calls, but I wanted to ask you some questions.
Sure.
So this decorum rule, and look, I'll just say this. I understand the First Amendment. In fact, I do First Amendment training for private sector employers because there are terrific limits in the private sector on First Amendment, but it's not, there's just not total abdication of those rights in the workplace. They do have rights to speak up about safety and certain issues and harassment and all those things. So I do that training. I agree with you that there needs to be some level of decorum when it comes to public officials. People will attack a public official the day you get elected. You are now a public official and you're kind of fair game, and they can call you just about anything unless you can prove that it's clear defamation. And I think that's right. I think there should be some level of decorum at public meetings. I don't think that you signed up to be a town council member and for me to come in and call you a thug and a crook and far worse. And so I think that makes sense. But I want to go back to the issue of this exodus. So you've also lost, for example, the town manager. You want to explain that one?
I can only speak to the letter that he issued. He said it's time. He's retiring. And there's another departure that we had recently. The town attorney, Westland and Bennett, and I can weigh in more on that.
Okay.
Westland and Bennett, they were the attorneys at the beginning of the term, and I've had some very deep professional concerns about Weston and Bennett that started before we got elected. And I shared that with all the members of the now elected council. And it's centered on what conflicts of interest that emerged in relationship to Weston and Bennett and the developer of the Lansing Country Club parcel. And I put these forward. Now, mind you, David Weston, I don't know him. I've come to know him since I was on the council. And I made it very clear to him very early on in a private conversation, Dave, this relationship that you have here is troubling. It's one of the most troubling things that I see right now for our council. And here it is. David works for the city of Hammond, and the developer, I believe, seeking an advantage, thought to himself, well, who can I hire to represent me that will give me an edge? And he very cleverly went out and he hired Kevin Smith. And you know Kevin Smith, he's the corporate counsel.
Kevin Smith is a personal friend.
And Kevin is a phenomenal attorney. I have tremendous respect for him. But I thought to myself, Dave, I'm troubled. You are making hundreds of thousands of dollars from Hammond. The top Hammond attorney now is on the other side. My concern is how vigorously you're going to negotiate for Munster. Now, additional step.
But wait a minute. Is that really a conflict? Because here, as an example, you are opposed to data centers. Yes, you went out of your way to clarify your opposition by posting the letter of opposition that you filed with the county. All right. But attorneys, when you look at what they do, they have clients, and those clients often cross paths with each other. I don't think that David Westland is somehow being unfairly influenced by Kevin Smith. I think Kevin Smith is corporation counsel. David Westland represents the Economic Development Commission. He also represents the Plan Commission, which I will acknowledge I'm a member of. So I do know David Westland. He seems to be a very capable attorney for the Plan Commission. But the fact that he represents clients for the city of Hammond and that Kevin Smith represents this developer, that somehow there's a conflict because David Westland also represents, I believe, the town of St. John. He represents a lot of communities on economic development issues, at least. So I don't know that you can say that it's a real conflict. I mean, your definition of conflict and my definition may differ, but I don't see it as a conflict. But nonetheless, you had concerns, and you have the right as a council member to have concerns. You get to hire whoever you want. Ultimately, the town council gets to hire whoever they want. So that's a fair that's important to point out too. So you decided that you didn't want Westland.
Well, hang on. To your point, I am having a concern about a conflict of interest. He's a licensed professional. I don't want to put something out publicly where you can call the integrity and professionalism of another attorney into question. I feel that on something like that, I need to make sure that I am on firm, broad ground. So I didn't just say there's a conflict. I took an additional step. I went out and I hired one of the top ethics attorneys in the state of Indiana. His name is James Bell. Mr. Bell was referred to me by former Indiana Supreme Court Disciplinary Commission Chairman Donald Lundberg. And I hired James and I said, look, I've got this concern. Is this something that is really a conflict under the rules? Is this something where I should be raising issues with Attorney Westland? And he studied it, and he came back and he said, yes. And the essence of this is that when you have economic interests and those interests come into conflict, in this case, Westland's interests in the revenue streams from the city of Hammond and the perception that Kevin Smith is involved with Hammond in a leadership position, that gives the appearance of a conflict of interest that could be troubling. And you got to remember, we're talking about the public environment. Perception, you've heard the saying, perception's 9/10 of the law.
And I'm just pulling up James Bell because sure enough, I know the guy.
Do you?
I'm thinking, wait a minute, that name sounds familiar. And first and he'll probably sue me for this. First, I'm thinking of Bob Bell, the guy that played Bozo, and I don't mean that. I shouldn't say that, but then I'm thinking James Bell. James Bell. I know a James Bell, and I look. No comparison whatsoever. So look, so you again, in your view and your consultant's view, in this case James Bell, you decided that it was conflict, and so you had issues with David Westland.
And now this was in 2024. I raised those issues, and the council listened, we responded, and we agreed that in the case of the Ken Mara negotiation, Westland should not be involved, and we hired Attorney John Reed, who's a former Munster Town Council.
Who I also know.
Okay, so Reed was handling that, and he was handling it up until April, and then at some point, I learned, there was a couple of things that I learned. The first thing was David Westland had become, in my opinion, the go-to attorney for data center development projects in Northwest Indiana. He was hired by the developer down in Lowell. He was hired by the city of Hobart to defend their data center projects.
Okay.
So here he is, he's the data center guy, and he's negotiating with the developer who's now telling us he wants a data center.
But isn't this like when you represent clients and my brothers do the same thing? I mean, you represent a client. One day you're representing somebody as a defendant, and then you get a call, and 6 months later you're representing somebody else who may work for the organization that you were suing previously. It's not necessarily a conflict. There was no connection. I mean, the fact
fair
that
enough.
David Westland is an expert on economic development. I mean, that's his forte.
Fair.
So he's going to get hired by a lot of different entities. I mean, that's to me that's. Again, if you feel that he just doesn't serve your purpose, you have the right to choose who you want.
Fair enough, and I raised that as a concern. Okay, it's not illegal.
Right.
But I raised it as a concern. Then, and here's where I really got concerned. I later discovered that in addition to the Kevin Smith concerns, the other data center developer, the other attorney working for the data center developer, Scott Yanni, who I think very highly of.
I know Scott very well.
Scott was involved in a business dispute with his former firm, and he hires Westland at the beginning of this year. Westland now is negotiating with Scott Yanni because Kevin Smith had stepped back, and Westland works for Scott Yanni.
Again, here, there are attorneys who work for Lake County, though, who also represent clients against the county. There are attorneys who work for landlords, but will also represent, individuals in disputes. You all do it. It's there's only a certain pool of individuals, and when it comes to certain practices, especially, right, there aren't that many people doing, for example, real estate law. Mm-hmm. All right, there aren't that many people. I'm going to use my brother and my son. There aren't that many people doing bankruptcy law. So there are, there's a small pool of individuals doing economic development, and once again, there are those cases that cross each other. But is it more happenstance? Is it part of the professionalism, or is it deliberate? And I don't think it's deliberate, is my point. I don't think you deliberately go out and find somebody to represent that is, contrary to a client that you had 3 years ago.
Tom, and I agree with everything you said. It's like a lot of things in life. It's not what happens to you that matters. It's how you handle it. Weston had this representation with the data center developer. We had to go find it. He represented Scott Yanni, the developer's attorney, and he's negotiating with Yanni for what could potentially be millions of dollars of impact on the town of Munster. We had to go find that. I pointed all these things out, and I brought them up at a council meeting, and it was contentious. And there were accusations and insults that were thrown out, and I think that's very unfortunate. And I saw Mr. Westland's resignation letter, and I could feel the emotion that was contained in that letter. But this is a professional concern, and there's ways to deal with this, and he knows it. You disclose these conflicts, you make sure that your client's fully aware of them, you get your client to waive that. He attempted to do that at the last council meeting that got contentious, but he didn't disclose these other things. He didn't disclose that he was working for Scott Yanni. You gotta let your clients know these things are on the table. And then you could say, hey, client, this is what's going on. Are you okay with me continuing to represent you? That was not happening. It was a I felt, this is my opinion, I felt that it was a catch me if you can environment. And I put this forward and I said, listen, let's get back to doing this the professional way. This is Munster. One of our taglines is, Munster's the town of integrity.
Yep.
Okay? Integrity is, you put it on the table, and if it means that you can't be the attorney for this project, so be it.
Okay.
That's integrity.
All right, let's take a couple of calls. 845-1100. We've got callers waiting. Good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning. Mr. Petersen, you talk a lot about integrity, and you brought up the Lowell data center a couple times. Isn't it true that you approached the developer and said you would drop your opposition if they fired Mr. Westland?
I don't believe that happened. I know the developer's representative. His name is Tom Dabertin. Tom actually...
It didn't happen. You don't believe it didn't happen.
I had a conversation. I've had a number of conversations with him. And furthermore, I think that's a mischaracterization of my conversation with him. I was hired by my clients, Tom and Stephanie Barranco. And I don't have the authority to say I'm going to not move forward with a representation. I had a conversation with Mr. Dockich. I explained to him concerns. I explained to him my extreme concerns about some of the people that he had hired, and I told him that I would take back any offer that he had for my clients and take it back to my clients. And
So you disparaged another attorney to that attorney's client.
disparage. I don't know what you mean. How did
You
I
just said
disparage another?
you had tremendous concerns about people he hired.
I don't see how that's disparagement. I think that's me expressing my opinion.
All right, have a good day.
All right, 845-1100. Okay, so again, I get it on the data centers, and I would think that people who are listening who are opposed to data centers, frankly, would say, hey, Jonathan Petersen's an attorney that I could call on to represent me if I'm opposed to a data center, because he's done it before and he's stated his opposition and he stated some reasons why. But I would also think that people are listening who are saying, okay, and if I want economic development and I'm developing a project and I want an attorney that knows economic development, I would probably call David Westland. And again, so you look at the person's track record, their expertise, and I think that what it comes down to is, look, you have the right as a town council member. You have to get a majority to agree to it, to who you choose as town attorney. And I don't have a problem with that. I think the bigger problem is there is and this is a question. How do you represent to the residents of Munster that, again, you're looking for positive direction, positive movement in the town of Munster? You are not there just trying to be controversial. You're not trying to undermine the process. How do you address those concerns?
Well, I point people to my record, and I point people to the ideas that I put forward. In the context of this Lansing Country Club parcel, I believe that a data center is a net negative for the community, because I believe that there will be serious negative economic impact on things like property values, and I don't think it brings extrinsic value. People are not going to be going to that location. It's going to, quite the opposite. It's going to be locked down like Fort Knox. So I put out a vision of development, and my vision is this. There has to be a collective basket of benefits that are delivered to the community. Those benefits include the property tax component, which is important, and I think there's extrinsic benefits. Going back to the original proposal from the developer, where he was going to put in office and medical, for-profit medical, I was talking to a doctor friend of mine recently, and she said, Jonathan, my neighbors to the left and right of me are Illinois doctors. They moved here from Illinois, and they found Munster because they were working here. And I thought, aha, an extrinsic benefit. You're always going to need a medical professional. You're going to need doctors today, tomorrow, 10 years from now. And if we have development that has those types of extrinsic benefits, we're bringing value into the community that goes above and beyond just the development itself. That's the kind of thing that I'm looking to articulate for Munster, and that's the kind of change that I'm looking to make. And I think it's a change that people find attractive. And if I look at what my friends in Griffith have done, that's the proof. This is the way that Republicans can continue to bring smart and competent leadership into communities like Munster.
And just to clarify, what you're not, so the claims that people are saying, well, Jonathan Petersen is just, doing Sherman's March to the Seas, just burning everything in his path, and he's causing all these changeovers in staffing. We've already talked about the town attorney, that situation, but that situation excluded, you're not out there trying to push people out.
Absolutely not. I think we've got phenomenal staff. The Munster staff, I believe, are the best in Northwest Indiana. And I want to continue to see Munster on a trajectory of growth and positive development. And I want to continue to keep Munster Munster.
But how do you get that message out there? Because there's a lot of people blaming you for those things. And if what you're saying is true, then, you know, how do you get that message out? Because once again, when you look at Northwest Indiana in recent years, the only contentious situation that I can think of with town or city councils is maybe East Chicago. There's been a little bit, but most of them, when they're at least in the public, okay? I know all 9 members of the Hammond City Council, and what they do in private, okay, they can argue like cats and dogs, but it's more of a unified front. How do you recapture kind of that unified front when it's necessary in public with your fellow council members?
Well, I'll tell you what. That's part of the reason why I introduced the civility resolution, and that's why I am out having conversations like what we're having here today.
Great.
Ultimately, you know how this gets resolved? It gets resolved at the ballot box.
Yeah, that's true, and you're right about that, and I'm glad that you came on. I do want to point out to anybody that's viewing, listen, Jonathan is not sweating because he's being interviewed, folks. It is hot as hell in here. Adriana came in and turned on some more fans. We're having a little problem with the air conditioning, so I just want to point that out because
thank you, Tom.
It is watching
it is warm in here.
It is warm in here, and he came in a suit and tie, and it's just hot as hell in here. So I appreciate you coming in. All right, thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Morning Call on WJOB 1230 AM 104.7 FM. We'll be right back.
Crazy Kaplan's Fireworks.
Hi, I'm Greg Kaplan. Most of you know me as Crazy Kaplan. I started in the basement of my house with the vision of someday running my own fireworks business. Crazy Kaplan's Fireworks prides itself on taking care of you, the customer. Our largest fireworks store is located at Exit 5, Klein, and 8094 in Hammond. These showrooms right now are jam-packed. Because we import and buy volume, we can offer fireworks a huge savings and pass it on to the customer. Our selection will blow you away. As the saying goes, stack them deep, sell them cheap. Just like Papa Sam used to say, make the customer happy. The best selection of rockets, mortar shells, aerials, firecrackers, fountains, and family assortments. Come see us at Crazy Kaplan's